Hey guys, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the texts that I read over the previous week. I know you've heard me talk about it a smidgen before, but the first text that I read was the modernized graphic novel version of Little Women. It's called Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy. And something I really think that could be a technique and just a way to analyze the text that we could teach students is the idea of like character development. Because in this book, we really see a change from the four sisters in the beginning to the end. So I was thinking potentially students, because it's a graphic novel, could combine like the skills and the model text that they've seen and create two little comics. Either based on the characters that we've read in the novel, or maybe their friends or their family, and they would have to show from one comic and then into the next how like the characters developed and have changed. um, that could tie into like a writing four standard, creating an artwork in response to a text. Reading three, just really analyzing how individuals develop and interact throughout a text. An example of that in the book is how in the beginning Meg is talking about, don't bring up politics at this party. I will die, and then I just really need to marry rich because then I'll live the life I want. And then by the end of the novel, she's brought Jo to a women's march, and she's ended up without a boyfriend. She dumps her boyfriend because she's like, no, I want to go to law school and like earn my own money. So that's a really great example of character development. Um, Similarly, another thing with this text is I think this is just such a great opportunity to teach students and having them like compare the classic version to this version. I think it's a great kind of like bridge into getting them excited about such a classic text, because it is like still relevant and so many of the themes are actually really the same. But I think that I could really have the students focus on the differences in what the subject matter, like the changes that the modernized version had, and maybe like why these authors were more able or comfortable to make those changes. So, for example, Jo in the modern version comes out to her family and she says that she's gay, which is something that people have kind of, talked about and theorized about with Jo in the original novel. But at that time, it was not something that would have been as accepted. And, she does say, though, I can't over my unhappiness of the fact that I was born a girl or something like that. So she was laying that groundwork, and then, students could analyze why authors are able to actually make those changes now. Similarly, again, like I said, Meg doesn't end up with a husband. She ends up going to law school and like kind of really being her own independent woman. And similarly, Meg is the same way. So, the sisters aren't married off by the end, and comparing why the authors, like what the author's intent was with that, that could handle an RH6, or I'm sorry, yeah, an RH6 standard, talking about comparing two versions of the same topics and themes, and just again, really like analyzing the author's intent. Could be really fun with this. I know I would get excited about it. All right, so another text that I read this week. I love this text so much. So this is a play. It's called The Flick by Annie Baker, and I really love it. It kind of really deals with a lot of important young adult themes like mental illness and sexuality, and just like a lot of the pressures that young adults face. But I think technically this is a great text to use to teach students structure and just aspects of structure and how they affect the meaning and how the audience understands the text, describing how the author presents info, which is RH5 standard. I think that potentially we could focus a lot on the moments where two people are talking at the same time or three people are talking at the same time and how they're written this way and why does the author do that. And then it's like, because he's trying to, or she's trying to show you that the two people are overlapping each other when they're speaking. And so why is that important when you're doing a play, like things like that, and how the or the scene directions are all in italics. Another thing like why structure is integral to writing a play. And potentially I'll talk about this a little bit later with my literacy promoting activity, but potentially students could rewrite the ending of this because it's like kind of a sad ending, and how they would have handled things differently if they were in one of the characters' shoes or something like that. And that would be a great way to assess if they've been able to understand the different types of structure and what they do. Another thing that this text really shows, is tone. The way that she conveys tone through the use of italics, like dashes, all of the little like dot dot dots to indicate pausing, and like even though it's a monologue, having lines split up and not just sequential. Why is that? And I think a lot of this has to do with caps, yelling in caps, things like that, and why that's potentially so important when it comes to reading a play, because also, who are the people that are really important that are going to be reading the play? The actors, and these are almost like acting cues in and of themselves. So we could talk about that a lot too, which is really interesting. So the last text that I read, Tears of a Tiger. Oh, and previously the standard that goes with tone and mood and how structure and word choice affects that would be the reading 4 standard. Okay, Tears of a Tiger is a multi-genre novel that I read, and it's very sad, but it has great opportunities for teaching students about structure and content and language. So I think particularly this is a great text to use to teach explicit messages, because just in this example that I chose, students are in a ELA class, and this is like a transcript that we're reading as the reader, and they're reading Macbeth, and a student talks about, I get what Shakespeare's talking about. He's talking like life is short, and then I think that the only reason he really wants to die and he's depressed is because he's had so much death on his hands. And then a character that we kind of know is struggling with suicidal tendencies, gets up and leaves the class, and the only way that we know this is because his teacher says, Andy, where are you going? What's wrong? Can someone go check on him? So that's a very clear, explicit message, like, what's going on with Andy? What do we think is happening here? What is the author trying to tell us? And that could be the 10 or the reading 1 standard, citing text evidence to support like analysis of explicit messages as well as inferences. So I think that that's like, and that's throughout this novel, or this text, I guess. Similarly, so here you get to kind of see a bit of like the aspects of multi-genre. So this is a newspaper kind of like clippings that were shown in the text. Also, one of the characters' prayers is in here. Another one has their English homework assignment submitted in there. So obviously when reading this text, I feel like I'm going to talk about a little bit more of my literacy promoting activity, but multi-genre assignment could be such a great way to like incorporate what you've learned from this and like putting it into their writing as well. They could potentially, again, like writing 4, create a response to it by creating the multi-genre, like around the text, the theme, and the understanding and knowledge of the characters and the techniques and many genres. I also think what's really important about this text is the ability that like speech is so different depending on who's speaking, and so really like analyzing how different characters speak and why, and how language fits into different contexts, and then having students apply that as well. So that kind of goes into my first literacy promoting activity, which was for Tears of a Tiger. It would be one aspect of a multi-genre portfolio that I would have students do, and I took the kind of something that I already talked about, so it would be easier for me to explain. But what I would have students do is do a Facebook post from the point of view of one of the characters, and then have another character respond in a comment. The real thing that I'm assessing with this is not only the understanding of characters and what they would say, but how they would say it. So this, I think, would be a great opportunity to have students go back to the text, really study the character that they've chosen's style and tone and the vocab that they use, and apply it into this assignment. And I think that this is really great because it could potentially be a moment of humor and lightness within the realm of social media and a Facebook post, because that's kind of rare when it comes to like the content of this book. Obviously, they could go in a sadder direction if they wanted to, but I just thought it was interesting. I, for example, chose to do something a bit more humorous. It was like from the point of view of BJ, who was in the Macbeth classroom and who had started to really understand what Shakespeare is saying. So he's like, yo, I used to think that Shakespeare stuff was a bunch of nonsense. He's an old white dude, but he's actually kind of dope. Just kind of writing about, I'm so glad I have Mrs. Blackwell because she makes all this weird stuff make sense. And then Andy, the kid that's really struggling and not responding well to the content, says, speak for yourself, man. Today's class was whack. I hope I never have to read Shakespeare again. And then I could potentially have students just write a little blurb on the back with basically explaining to me why they chose to have those characters say those certain things, and a little bit of like giving examples of the language that they feel is specific to that character. I think this could be just like a really great literacy promoting activity in and of itself, but also as a part of a multi-genre portfolio. Really just testing students' understanding of different techniques and different genres. So the other literacy promoting activity I kind of chose the movie poster, but I did it in a play poster, like an advertisement for the play that's being put up, just because it is a play and I feel like that's too perfect of an option to like pass up. So the reason I made mine look like this, so to give you a little context, the play has pretty much 3 characters. There's one that's like in it barely, but pretty much 3. And the audience, it was intended that the audience sits kind of in a way where they're in movie theater seats in the way it's set up, and then the characters kind of do their job cleaning the theater all around the audience. And there's huge moments of space and no dialogue within the play, and it's like supposed to run like for 3 hours long, no intermission or something. For a relatively short script, it takes forever because of that intentional space. And so I tried to depict that with this like blackness and all of this emptiness. I also feel like a great way to really like have students analyzing characters as well as like what happened in the play and like what they take away from the play is I would have them like pick the 4 people that they would cast, and then they would have to put a rationale as to why. So like I put myself because I just feel like I've always wanted to play Rose. She's the one girl character, and she's very like kind of just like open and like talks about whatever's on her mind. And then I put Michael Cera as one of the characters, a little bit off, a little bit nerdy, kind of like has all of these great intentions, super sweet, but just kind of like doesn't connect with people that easily. And then Nat Wolff is just like, there's the character that like comes in for 3 seconds and I think he's really cute, so I put him in. And then Justice Smith as the other character because he's like very young and up and coming, and I think he could play like a struggling, overpressured student who's struggling with his mental health like really well, because I saw his performance in Paper Towns. So that's like the decisions that I made. I think that this could be a really great literacy promoting activity because not only does it do the writing 4 standard, like creating art and like using that creativity in response to the text, it's a lot of character development and analyzing how individuals develop. And I think it's also a lot of like staking a claim and then defending their claim through citing the text, and then providing like, I would definitely want them on the back to write like why they chose these specific people as their cast, and why it makes sense, and then why they chose, the font, or why they chose the color and the space or blackness or whatever. And I just think this could be really intriguing because I'm just imagining students like laying these, hanging them outside of my door, and it's such a niche text. I think it could be a cool way for other students walking by to be like, oh, I wonder what they're doing. Also, this text in general, like not only this activity, but the text in general really has the potential to work in performances in class, and talking about, even if we just do a little section of the text when we're analyzing it, I could teach them, what's the difference between just reading it and acting it. I could have them, again, like rewrite the ending and then cast their classmates and then perform it. I think that overall, this is a really great text for students to learn from. All three of the ones that I read last week were really wonderful examples, and I could consider teaching all of them in my future class. All right, can't wait to hear you guys. Bye.